take a moment to just notice something honestly. Does it feel like life has been shifting lately? Not necessarily in obvious ways, but in subtle ways. Things that used to motivate you don't quite hold the same energy anymore. Conversations that once felt normal suddenly feel uncomfortable. Certain environments feel heavier than they used to. And at the same time, new thoughts are appearing. New ideas are surfacing. New possibilities are starting to whisper quietly in the background of your mind. It's almost like the internal landscape of your life is rearranging itself. And if you've been feeling that recently, you're not imagining it. Because April carries an energy that tends to bring clarity and reorientation. It's the kind of month where people suddenly realize this path I've been walking might not actually be the path I want to continue. Not because anything dramatic has happened, not because something external forced the change, but because something inside you shifted. Your perception changed. Your awareness deepened. And once awareness deepens, certain things become impossible to ignore. If you're new here, hi, I'm Cherry. I'm a spiritual life coach, numerologist, and someone who spends a lot of time exploring the patterns that shape how we experience transformation. And today we're talking about something that many people are sensing right now, but struggling to explain. The feeling that life might be repositioning itself into a different trajectory, a different timeline. Now, before your mind jumps to something mystical or abstract, let's slow down and look at what that actually means. Because timeline shifts rarely happen in dramatic cosmic moments. They happen through awareness, through moments where you suddenly see something clearly that you previously overlooked, through moments where you realize you can't keep pretending I don't see this. And that's where the energy of April becomes powerful. Because April is deeply connected to energy body 4, the neutral mind. The neutral mind is the part of consciousness that allows you to observe reality clearly without immediately reacting. It pauses, it looks, it discerns, it asks questions like, what is actually happening here? What patterns am I noticing? What is my life trying to show me right now? And when that level of clarity begins activating, things start shifting. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because you are seeing it differently. Before we go deeper into this conversation, let me pause for a moment and say something important. If this kind of conversation resonates with you, if you're someone who enjoys exploring the deeper energetic, emotional, and spiritual patterns shaping our lives, make sure you hit the subscribe button and tap that notification bell, because this channel isn't just about inspiration. It's about understanding the forces that shape our behavior, our perception, and the direction our lives take, so we can move through change with awareness rather than confusion. And if something I said in the last section landed for you, if you've been sensing that quiet shift happening inside your own life, drop a lightning bolt emoji in the comments. Because one of the most powerful things we can realize during periods of change is this: we're not alone in the experience. Many people are navigating similar transitions right now. It's what a universal year one is all about. Now let's talk about something that happens when people begin sensing these shifts. They start feeling disorientated. It's a strange kind of feeling. Not quite anxious, not quite excitement. More like a sense that the internal map you've been using to navigate your life no longer matches the terrain you're standing in. You might notice yourself questioning things you never questioned before. You might notice certain conversations suddenly feel uncomfortable. You might notice that some goals that once felt extremely important now feel strangely empty. And when those shifts begin happening, the mind often tries to interpret them as a problem. It starts asking questions like, what's wrong with me? Why do I suddenly feel different about this? Why can't I just go back to how things felt before? But here's the thing. What you're experiencing isn't dysfunction. It's awareness expanding. When awareness expands, the mind begins seeing patterns it previously overlooked. You start recognizing dynamics you once tolerated. You start seeing choices you once made automatically. You begin noticing the subtle ways you've been shaping your life through habit rather than conscious decision. And that's where the neutral mind becomes incredibly important. Because without the neutral mind, those moments of expand awareness can feel overwhelming. The emotional mind reacts quietly. Fear says something is wrong. Excitement says everything must change immediately. The mind starts racing in multiple directions at once. But the neutral mind does something very different. The neutral mind pauses. It steps back. It observes the situation without immediately rushing to fix it. And from that calm place of observation, something powerful happens. Clarity begins to emerge. Instead of reacting to the shift, you start understanding it. You begin recognizing the patterns that led you to where you are. You start seeing how your past decisions shaped the current moment. And once that clarity appears, you gain access to something extremely important, choice. Because awareness without the neutral mind often leads to overwhelm. But awareness with the neutral mind leads to discernment. Discernment allows you to ask questions like, what direction is my life actually moving in? Is the path I've been following still aligned with the person I'm becoming? What patterns am I ready to release? And what possibilities are starting to appear that I couldn't quite see before? These questions are not comfortable, but they are powerful, because every time you ask them honestly, you step a little further out of autopilot and a little closer to conscious living. And that's exactly what makes April such an important energetic turning point. April doesn't necessarily force change, but it reveals the places where change is already happening. When people hear the phase, timeline shifts, they often imagine something dramatic, something mystical, something that happens outside of them. But in reality, timeline shifts are usually far more subtle than that. A timeline shift doesn't always look like your life suddenly changing overnight. More often, it begins with a moment of awareness, a moment where you see something clearly that you previously ignored, a moment where you realize, I can't keep pretending this works for me. And those moments can appear in very ordinary situations. You might be sitting in a conversation and suddenly recognize a dynamic you've been participating in for years. You might notice yourself about to respond to something the way you always have, and then pause. You might realize that a path you've been following no longer feels aligned with who you're becoming. These moments seem small, but they are actually incredibly powerful, because every time you see a pattern clearly, you gain the ability to choose differently. And choice is what creates timeline shifts. Think about it this way. Your life is not just shaped by the big decisions you make. It's shaped by the thousands of smaller ones, the conversations you choose to have, the boundaries you choose to hold, the opportunities you decide to accept or decline. Each one of those decisions creates a slightly different direction for your life. Most of the time, we don't notice this happening because habit is running the process. We respond the way we always have. We make decisions based on old identities. We follow patterns that once made sense for us. But when awareness increases, those automatic responses begin to slow down. You start noticing them. You start seeing the moment where the pattern begins. And when that moment becomes visible, you gain access to a new possibility, the possibility of choosing something different. This is where the neutral mind becomes a navigational tool for transformation. Without the neutral mind, people tend to react quickly. Fear might cause them to retreat. Excitement might cause them to rush forward impulsively. Emotion can pull them in different directions before clarity has a time to form. But the neutral mind introduces something extremely important, a pause. The neutral mind gives you the space to ask questions like, is this reaction coming from my past or from my present awareness? Is this situation asking me to repeat an old pattern or to create a new one? What would the person I'm becoming choose in this moment? Those questions might sound simple, but they change everything, because the moment you pause long enough to ask them, you step out of automatic behavior. You move from reaction into conscious choice. And that's where timeline shifts begin. Not through dramatic events, but through small moments of awareness where you decide to respond differently than you did before. Now, here's something important to understand about these moments. They don't always feel comfortable. In fact, they often feel uncertain, because when you choose differently, you're stepping outside familiar territory. The old identity knows how to navigate the past. It knows the rules. It knows how to survive inside the pattern you've already lived. But the new identity is still forming. And when that new identity begins making decisions, the mind sometimes interprets that unfamiliarity as instability. This is why people sometimes feel disorientated during periods of growth. Not because they're lost, but because the old map no longer applies and the new one is still being drawn. This is exactly why April can feel like a turning point. April invites you to notice the moments where you are standing between two choices: the familiar path that leads back into the past and the unfamiliar past that leads towards the person you are becoming. The neutral mind is what allows you to stand at the crossroads without panic, to observe the options clearly, to feel the emotions without letting them control the decision, and from that place of awareness, to choose intentionally. In the next section of this video, we're going to talk about something that often appears when these shifts begin happening. Because once awareness increases, people often start noticing patterns in their lives that they can no longer ignore. Relationships, habits, environments, choices that once felt normal suddenly start feeling misaligned. And when that happens, many people face a moment of truth, a moment where they realize they can neither continue repeating the pattern or consciously step into something different. And that moment of truth is where real transformation begins. Once awareness begins expanding, something interesting starts to happen. Patterns that used to operate quietly in the background of your life suddenly become visible. It's like someone turned the lights on in a room that used to be dim. At first, you might notice small things, a reaction you always have during certain conversations, a habit that keeps repeating in your relationships, a way of responding to stress that you've never questioned before. And once you notice these patterns, it becomes very difficult to go back into not seeing them, because awareness changes the relationship you have with your own behavior. Before awareness, patterns feel automatic. They feel like this is just how things are. But after awareness, those same patterns start feeling different. You begin recognizing the moment they begin. You see the emotional triggers more clearly. You notice the choices that follow those triggers. And suddenly you're standing in a moment of decision that didn't exist before. A moment where you realize, I could respond the way I always have, or I could choose something different. That moment of recognition is incredibly powerful because it can also feel uncomfortable. Because the moment you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it's happening without your participation. And that's where many people start feeling resistance. Resistance doesn't necessarily look like denial. Sometimes it shows up as a distraction. People suddenly get very busy. They focus on other problems. They convince themselves that the pattern isn't actually that important. Not because they're unwilling to grow, but because the moment you see a pattern clearly, you realize it may require change. And change always asks something of you. It might ask you to have a conversation you've been avoiding. It might ask you to set a boundary you've never enforced before. It might ask you to walk away from something that once felt safe. So when awareness appears, the mind sometimes tries to retreat back into familiar territory. Not because the old pattern is healthy, but because the mind already understands how to navigate it. And this is exactly where Energy Body 4, the neutral mind, becomes your ally. The neutral mind doesn't rush you into drastic decisions. It doesn't pressure you to change everything overnight. Instead, it helps you sit with the awareness long enough to understand it. It asks questions like, what is this pattern actually trying to show me? What part of my past created this behavior? And most importantly, what choice would move me closer to the person I'm becoming? Those questions slow the entire process down. They move you out of reaction and into discernment. And discernment is what makes real transformation sustainable. Because when people try to force change too quickly, they often create more instability. But when change emerges from clarity, it becomes far easier to maintain. This is one of the reasons April can feel like such a revealing month. The energy of this period tends to illuminate patterns that have been operating quietly for a long time, not to shame you, not to overwhelm you, but to show you what is ready to evolve. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is simply acknowledge what you've been seeing, to recognize the pattern honestly, to admit that it exists, and to allow yourself the space to decide what you want to do with that awareness. Because awareness itself is the beginning of transformation. The moment you see clearly, the process has already started. In the next section, we're going to move into something practical, because reorganizing patterns is one thing, but learning how to navigate change without becoming overwhelmed is another. So we're going to talk about how to strengthen the neutral mind during periods of transition, and how to stay grounded when your life starts moving in a new direction. Because when the neutral mind becomes strong, something remarkable happens. Change stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling intentional. Once you start reorganizing these patterns, once awareness begins expanding, the next challenge many people face is learning how to stay steady while things are changing. Because when awareness increases, your life doesn't always rearrange itself instantly. Sometimes there's a period of transition. You're no longer comfortable in the old way of living, but the new path hasn't fully stabilized yet. And during that in-between phase, the mind can feel unsettled. You might notice moments where you feel very clear about the direction you're moving in, and then moments where uncertainty returns. You might feel confident one day and reflective the next. This fluctuation is completely natural, because when identities shift, the mind and nervous system don't need time to reorganize themselves around the new reality. Both need time to reorganize themselves around the new reality. And this is exactly where the neutral mind becomes your stabilizing force. The neutral mind doesn't try to eliminate uncertainty. Instead, it creates space for you to remain centered while uncertainty exists. It allows you to observe what's happening without immediately reacting to it. And that observation creates calm. Let's practice something simple together for a moment. If you're watching this somewhere quiet, you can even pause for a second to try this with me. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Let the breath move all the way down into your chest. Then exhale slowly through your mouth. Allow your shoulders to drop as you breathe out. Now imagine stepping slightly back from your thoughts. Instead of being inside them, imagine you're observing them from a small distance. You might notice thoughts about the future, questions about decisions, concerns about change. Instead of trying to stop those thoughts, simply notice them. And as you observe them, say to yourself quietly, "This is a moment of awareness. Nothing needs to be solved immediately. Nothing needs to be forced. You're simply observing what is becoming visible." This simple shift activates the neutral mind, because the neutral mind doesn't rush to conclusions. It watches, it listens, it gathers information, and when the moment of action arrives, it responds from clarity rather than pressure. When people learn to access this state regularly, something interesting begins to happen. The emotional intensity around change starts to soften. Instead of feeling like life is happening to you, it begins to feel like something you are participating in. You start noticing patterns earlier. You start recognizing when a reaction is coming from the past rather than the present. You begin seeing options that were invisible before. And over time, that awareness creates something incredibly powerful: self-trust. Because the more clearly you see your own patterns, the more confidently you choose the direction of your life. This is why the neutral mind is such an important energy body to strengthen during April. April isn't necessarily asking you to make every decision immediately, but it is asking you to pay attention, to notice the places where clarity is emerging, to observe the patterns that are revealing themselves, and to trust that awareness itself is guiding you towards the next step. Sometimes transformation begins with action, but often it begins with clear seeing. In the final section of this video, we're going to bring all of this together. We'll talk about how the shifts happening in April connect to the larger 2026 cycle, and why the decisions you make during this period can influence the direction of your life for years to come. And we'll also connect this conversation to the next video. where we're going to talk about one of the biggest things that prevents people from stepping into new timelines. The belief that they need to feel ready before they move forward. And that belief keeps more people stuck than almost anything else. Now let's widen the perspective for a moment, because the shifts many people are feeling right now are not only connected to the energy of April, they're also connected to the larger cycle we're currently moving through. In numerology, 2026 carries the vibration of year 1 and 10 energy. And whenever a year 1 appears in the collective cycle, it marks the beginning of something entirely new, a new chapter, a new direction, a new identity beginning to form. And year 1 energy always invites initiation. It's a moment where life quietly asks, are you ready to start living differently? But here's the thing about beginnings. They rarely arrive with complete certainty. Beginnings often arrive as possibilities, ideas, awareness, moments where you realize that the path ahead might look different from the one you've been walking. And that's exactly why the neutral mind is so important during this time. Because when new cycles begin, the emotional mind often becomes very active. Fears try to hold onto the familiar. Excitement tries to rush forward too quickly. And if we react to either of those impulses without clarity, we can miss the deeper invitation of the moment. But when the neutral mind is present, something different happens. You gain the ability to observe the new cycle unfolding. You begin noticing the subtle signals life is offering you, opportunities that appear unexpectedly, ideas that feel aligned in a way you can't quite explain, conversations that shift your perspective. They are often the first signs that a new direction is opening. And April is one of the months where many people begin recognizing those signals. Not because the universe suddenly changed course, but because your awareness has reached the point where you can see what was already trying to emerge. Sometimes the most important shift during a new cycle is not external. Sometimes it's internal. It's the moment you realize that the person you've been becoming is no longer willing to live inside the same limitations. The moment you recognize that certain patterns have run their course. The moment you see clearly that continuing the old path would require ignoring what you now understand about yourself. And once that clarity appears, the next step is rarely immediate action. Often the next step is simply acknowledging the truth of what you're seeing, allowing that awareness to settle, allowing the neutral mind to observe the possibilities right in front of you, and trusting that the next step will reveal itself when the moment is right. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this conversation, it's this. Change doesn't always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives as clarity, the quiet realization that something in your life is ready to evolve. And when that clarity appears, the most powerful thing you can do is stay present with it, not rush, not panic. Simply observe what is becoming visible. Because the moment you begin seeing clearly, you are already standing at the beginning of transformation. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about something that often prevents people from stepping into these new timelines. The belief that they need to feel ready before they take action. But the truth is, readiness is one of the biggest illusions that keeps people standing still. So in the next video, we're going to unpack why people wait for the perfect moment and how to move forward even when certainty hasn't fully arrived yet. If this conversation resonated with you, make sure you watch that video next, because it will help you take the awareness we explore today and turn it into real momentum. And if something in this transmission landed for you, if you've been sensing these shifts in your own life, let me know in the comments. What changes are you noticing right now? Sometimes simply sharing that awareness is the first step in stabilizing it. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, and join this space where we explore the deeper patterns shaping our lives. And if you need extra guidance to strengthen your energy bodies, there's a freebie in the description box below. So until next time, stay grounded, stay aware, and trust the clarity that is beginning to appear. Because sometimes the moment life starts feeling uncertain is the moment a completely new path is beginning to open. So until next time, bye for now.